FHIR Work Group co-chair. Hopefully I can take people through it. So if we could, could you keep it up? Hang on, if you go right, that'll actually put it to a different pack. So you gotta go there, and I think maybe if we just scroll down, we'll get through each of the slides. Yeah, okay. All right. So I think one of the things that we're doing in the FHIR Work Group is acting as governance points and engagement points for a number of different FHIR projects that are, some of those are standards projects, some of those will be software and tooling. And from a standards project, in terms of, in this case, FHIR IGs or specifications, there's a whole number of I guess, quality gates or engagement points where the FHIR Work Group itself is the engagement point for that. And the idea here is that we're going to run through the current processes with the FHIR Work Group in a standing kind of 15-minute in each of our calls until we go, I guess, really through all of them, so that we understand in the FHIR Work Group where these what the current processes are, and also we could collect some feedback and some suggestions to provide back to HL7AU representative as we enact this process or talk about what's involved. I see Brett's just joined. Hopefully you can take over, Brett, but Richard, your hand's up.
I seem to have just started recording this meeting. I'm not sure why that came up on my screen as a thing to click. We do normally record these. Will I keep recording this, and then can somebody tell me what to do with it when the meeting's finished?
It should automatically come through.
I actually suspect, Richard, that you requested the host to start recording, and they then hit OK on their machine, which then notified everybody that a recording has started. I actually think that was the workflow.
Okay, because I've got a little cloud with a glowing red spot in the middle of it, which comes up against my name, which suggests to me that I'm doing the recording. So
you are. How have you logged in as host?
I have no idea.
I think when Brett dropped off, the host transferred to Richard, because I saw that it said Richard has now become the host when Brett dropped off.
Okay, actually, yes, it says host, me. Yeah, okay. So, look, the recording's going, and at the end of the meeting, somebody can tell me how to put the recording wherever it should go.
That sounds good. It's doing it automatically, Richard.
Yeah,
no problem.
Fine, good. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard, for hitting record.
Sorry, that was me that requested recording. I noticed we weren't recording, so.
Oh no, that was an excellent thing to have done. So let's go back to the slides, and I'll hand over to Brett. I think, Brett, you probably heard where I was providing context for what I thought you were going to present, / if you didn't manage to make it back online, I would keep presenting.
Cool. Thank you. Cool. So who's hosting? You're happy to
me? Do you want to
press the button?
Scroll down.
You can press. Yep. You can press the. Yeah, you can press the button. So this. I think Danielle's given the context of why we're having a little chat, but this is really just to go through, particularly the project proposal part of the story. We'll just I have mentioned project scope statement, but we might do that separately, I think, just to clear this off in time. And just so this slide is just sort of showing a bit of an overview of our current kind of highest level kind of approach to the standards development. So you can see there's parts of the governance framework to create groups. So there's a process how groups get created. There's a project proposal part where groups can then create proposals for projects. Then more into the release planning space, doing project scope statements, which really get into deliverable artifacts and timelines and participants and detail in terms of when particular artifacts will get delivered. And as part of the kind of work we do produce specifications a lot of the time, or other kinds of material. But basically HL7 Australia will support content with specifications based on a project being formed, and then those get developed over time. So, you know, as committee work happens, we have our repositories and we have the ability to, you know, the infrastructure around the repositories as we develop specifications and work through that process. And then we go on to kind of publishing those specifications for connectathons and previews and things like that, and then into balloting processes to ballot and approve them, and then eventually publish final versions of things. So each of those steps and parts has their own kind of methodology. So project proposals have a process that you know, is there. Project scope statements, specification development are all kind of mainly committee decision-making practices and approaches to facilitation of IG work, and kind of standard methodologies around how that gets done. Publishing specifications, there's a publications function for HL7 Australia to be able to publish things, and there's a balloting process, including notice of intent to ballot and the ballot process itself, and voting, and how do we do reconciliations. So basically, we're hoping to kind of go through some of these parts. So today was a good opportunity to talk about project proposals, since we have one later in the meeting. So yeah, it was to be able to record that and yeah, kind of give people an overview of where this is coming from, and why we're kind of looking at these forms and things as we go. So I might go on to that. Yeah, so this is kind of just another version of that, where we have with the entities kind of listed. So we have the board kind of who's it's essentially in governance of the whole standards development process. We have the work groups, and so the FHIR Work Group is the only currently active work group. So we're essentially the governing group for fire artifacts. So it ends up being our responsibility to look after the subcommittees and basically help with the governance process. We have subcommittees, so the TDGs that are running now, eCore, eRequesting, are TDGs. So they're fully formed subcommittees that have their own scope of activity, so they can operate independently of us and have a scope, a remit to kind of look after an area, and their own artifacts to be able to kind of work on those. And so within the work groups and the subcommittees, projects can get formed. So we own some projects and are responsible for implementing them, but also govern them as well. And the TDGs have their own projects as well. So AU Core, FHIR is a project, and the AU Patient Summary is a project for the AU Core TDG, and eRequesting has the eRequesting specification. And within those projects, there are project scope statements. So when there's an intent to cover a particular period of time, a particular release, so you kind of have a specific release in mind, and that includes maybe balloting and other activities. So AU Core R1 is an example of that, where that's an artifact that's going to get delivered. It has been delivered now, and we have eRequesting R1 as well, being on train as a particular release project. So these are things, the projects and the project scope statements end up coming to the FHIR Work Group as the governing work group, and we kind of have an approval step to kind of accept that, understand the scope, make sure the scope is making sense. Go on, Richard.
Unmute. Okay. I sort of find myself thinking that project and project scope statement are sort of words for different sorts of things. I think of a project as being an activity or a piece of work, while I think of a project scope statement as being a document. And so so it's like a project scope statement would describe a project release or something. I don't think it undermines what you've said. I just find that that's sort of describing different sorts of things and presenting them as if they're the same sort of thing, I just find I don't know, unsettling.
Yeah. I think True. Like, because I think project is more about an area of interest, right, than a particular deliverable. And yeah, the project scope statement definitely nuts out exactly what the intent is for a release. It's really more like a release plan in terms of like, we intend to release this artifact in a period of time. We expect these people to be involved, and this is the scope of that particular release. So yeah, projects can be ongoing. I mean, the AU core project is ongoing, and the project scope statements will cover the release cycles, more specifically, so R1, R2. So it is just a way to kind of keep track of things as well in terms of what's happening, what's active and not active, because a project may exist, but there may be no project scope statements in place, so there's no intent for releases and things like that. So that's kind of just a way to indicate, I guess, where things are up to. But anyway, I might move on because that's kind of the overview picture. So just to talk about project proposals a little bit. So project proposals are really, these are really high level kind of considerations for the FHIR Work Group. So it's basically naming what the project is, which is sometimes important because that helps explain what's what the thing is about. But really, there's a kind of general description element, which is basically like a rationale for why this project should be, what's it going to do, what's its mission, highlight the interest and the kind of stakeholders that would be interested in this project, and really probably frame it with respect to other standards activity. So if you kind of relate to other standards or yeah, you expect to do that. But this can be kind of pretty unformed because you may have not done the scoping work in detail. So this is more a premise for activity, and then you'll get down to the real scoping in the project scope statement, which makes sense because that's the scope statement. So primarily it's really just setting out a high level entity that can operate independently and kind of work on things and make their own decisions. So as part of that too, we need a proposer, someone who's actually going to own that project, in terms of getting it started and make sure it can operate well. So there's some kind of target release timeline. So this is kind of some indication on, you think this is going to, this is probably not exact, and you're not targeting, maybe not targeting exactly which ballot cycles or anything you're interested in, but something that you expect if it has a time frame that's going to run. Danielle.
I wanted to ask a bit about project proposer, because I've been doing it differently than is documented here.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was meant to be leader. I know we put that on PSSs where we say who's actually leading the project. And the moment, because someone actually fronts up and talks about it and the comms go through project proposer, we've just been doing it as the comms point of contact, not the actual like project leader. So I think I'm a bit iffy about some sort of authority going there.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair point, because like I put, essentially it's a contact point, but it's in the absence of knowing who's running this project. I mean, the project needs to form. So I guess at this point, that is the person you'll contact about that. There'll be activities to form the project and who's going to lead the activities and things like that. So I think this is kind of pre-organization in terms of what's going to happen. But obviously, when a proposal comes, you want to make sure that people believe that this is viable, and there's enough interest that this makes sense. So I think that's probably a fair point. It's not specifically the leader, perhaps it's it's just who is currently running this proposal.
Or point of contact is how we've been doing it, if that's acceptable. Otherwise, we'll be swapping out some of the people that we'd put in from a Spark perspective as project proposer, because we hadn't realized we had to do the whole bring us to your leader kind of thing.
Not so much. Not so much. It's just this will be the person the FHIR Work Group would contact if they wanted to know what was happening.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So it's I agree with that.
Cool. Could it be who is leading this project proposal?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's
leading the
fair.
proposal, sure.
Sure. Cool. Yeah, and the other two things, and like this is some language that's on the form that is not always clear, and we've played around with this language a bit, but we have a primary governing work group. So effectively the FHIR Work Group is the only governing work group that exists at the moment, so it will be the FHIR Work Group until there's maybe an HL7 version 2 work group that's got to fit in that area. So they have to be nominated because effectively there has to be a governing work group for every project who at the end of the day has the governance responsibility to accept the project and yeah, can make you know, and has the review points and things built into project work. So so that becomes the kind of entity that can make sure that this project makes sense in the standards development for HL7 Australia. And we have the primary responsible group. So the responsible group can be the subcommittee. It can also be the FHIR Work Group if we have our own projects. But basically it's the committee that will actually enact the project work. So they will do the meetings, they will do the documentation, they will provide the leadership, they will progress the project in some way. So initially that probably means defining the scope in more detail and working out what these project scope statements should be. So they're actually the items on the form. So we're going to do one later. So that this will be good. We can actually see this in action. But yeah, unless there's a further comment, I don't think there's a lot to say there. There is a project registry that we do record projects that are submitted. So there is a submission process to submit it to a particular email in HL7 Australia. That means that it's registered with administration and we will list it on the project registry with status and allocated a project ID, which is essentially just a reference ID that can be used to refer to the project. Yeah, so that's kind of the basics of that. Might go on to the next one. So yeah, the approvals, there's a two-part approval. The governing work group has the initial responsibility to kind of accept as the scope that can be discussed and adjusted and accepted through a process, and that will be recorded in a meeting of that governing group, and the vote will be recorded as the acceptance being made or not if that happens, and then that will also be notified up to the board, who also technically has an approval. A lot of that is really just recognising the decision that's been made at the FHIR Work Group. Resource allocation is assured and things like that. So it's really just a more administrative check to say if there's any great danger to the organisation by this having this project operate. So it's pretty unlikely. It's more of an admin step, but it is a step we have for the board to approve it. So once a project's initiated, you now have the support of HL7 Australia resources. So we can provision repositories, you can use Confluence pages, you can run calls, supported online calls, Zoom calls, email lists can be set up and so forth. So that's just something that can be arranged to support the project work. Yeah, so that becomes just as an approved project, you can apply that to your activity, and yeah, that can be worked out. And that's probably it for that page. Go on.
I think we might need to hold this one over now, looking at the time.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, my next thing was just what's next. So next, I think we'll talk about project scope statements next time, or another time. So yeah, I basically covered the stuff for project proposals, and we might leave it there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett.
Following on from that, we have a project proposal. So Josh, you're going to run with this one. Do you want to take the screen, or do you just want me to bring it up?
It's only a couple of pages. I'll let you bring it up on the screen.
Cool.
So the intention of this one is we're bringing to the working group the project proposal for AU patient summary Inferno testing framework. And this is following on from the same sort of projects we've done for AU Core, in that we're basically creating a testing framework that will allow us to develop and deploy versions of test cases that align with the IG and help with the development. These will be rolled out and utilized at connectathons, and available at testing activities before a release, with a aim to publish this by July 2026 following the publication of AU patient summary. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to field those. I welcome anybody to come along to the Friday calls we also have on infra and tooling as well, which we cover a lot of these developments. And Danielle's got her hand up.
Yeah, just minor note from us on Sparked. Although I kind of love the colloquialism of it, I think in your position title, we should correct that to tooling in infrastructure.
This has been updated on the page. I don't know if the page has been refreshed. I did send out that correction. That's right. I sent out that correction.
I mean, it's cool. I do kind of love tooling, but you know.
Yep. No, that was corrected this morning. Just there is a page refresh there. That's right. Maybe I should change it back to tooling now. I kind of like that.
Other than spelling mistakes, is there anything anyone else would like to?
Just can I just so just to highlight. So this is specifically for the patient summary, IG scope only, and yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Should we put that in the title, like patient summary IG Inferno testing, or?
I think that's okay.
It does stipulate in there that a set of test cases aligned with the AU patient summary FHIR implementation guide, which covers IG, will be developed and deployed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
And this is the same project description that we utilized for the development of the AU Core Inferno testing framework as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if there's no other comments, do we need to motion and approve this?
It's not quite a spelling comment. It's perhaps more a grammar comment. Is a capital C in an email address normal? But yeah, I'm happy to move that this be accepted.
Thanks, Richard. Do I have a seconder?
Josh, I think you should second. It's your proposal.
Yeah, I can second. Wasn't sure if
everyone but the chair can motion
second.
And
okay.
propose.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, great. Anybody who wishes to abstain or vote against? Okay. So all four. I don't know how many we have. I can't see it.
14.
Oh, 14. Yep. Great. Okay. So approved. Wonderful.
Cool.
And in very record time. So we had allowed 15 minutes. Very good. Okay. So number 6. Returning to MBS PBS representation review actions 20 minutes. I'm not sure what that's about, Brett. What's that?
Well, I think this was just a follow-up from the previous discussions with MBS and PBS value sets, and just seeing if there was any further.
I think there were some outstanding actions on the minutes from last week. We can probably just check the bottom and check in with those people if they've got anything to report back.
Okay, so they're not in here. I'll have to go back to the previous minutes.
Thanks, Jane.
I have a thing to interrupt. In the waiting room, we've got patient care work group. I think it might be me who would let them in. Does that sound like
You'll
a
have to
plausible
as
client?
closed.
Does that sound like
It does,
a
because that is Stephen Chu, by the way.
Okay.
He's currently using that as his Zoom Addy. So that's Stephen.
Right.
And Stephen's pinging me to say, hey, let me in.
Did somebody want me to talk to my discovery piece around Medicare?
Yeah. I think the action items were down the bottom, Jane. Just right down the very bottom.
Sorry.
No stress. Yeah, Michael, that would be awesome.
Yes, Michael, that's fine.
I'll send a request to share my screen.
Sure. I'll stop. I don't know who's going to see that. I'm not getting it. Is that Richard or?
Oh, okay, that's cool.
I think it'd be Richard, but Richard should be. Oh yeah, cool.
I've taken control again. You should get it. It should be approved.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm just sharing a browser screen now.
I can see it.
So there's a terminology section on our Confluence page, which has a bunch of reviews and other things there. So I've just stuck it under there. So essentially, it was just surfacing what our requirements are for a code system for the Medicare schedule items to be referenced in AE base and inherited by any downstream modules. It would be subject to licensing arrangements with Services Australia. And ideally, you'd be able to do things like validate and look up on that code system. So I've made a little comment here around what the differences are between Medicare and DVA. And DVA has a number of their own items. So I think there's like 16 or 18, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a link to the schedule there. And some of the DVA items are just examples there. And there's others that they're sort of pre-authorized. So you ring them up and then they basically, some of those sort of vary a little bit in price and whatever. So my recommendation is that we create separate code systems for Medicare and DVA items. And then if we want a value set that includes everything from DVA, we can just include Medicare plus DVA codes. So there's, I've borrowed from THO, so the HL7's terminology authority. So from their external code system form here. So I've just put some details around the owner, some scope information. There's a link to downloads page, etc. Version management and what possibly we could use for a version number. So they maybe link it to the major versions or something like that. Bit around the legal side of stuff. I think there's some outstanding questions around what the description or the display would be for an item. Because Medicare don't publish those, all they do is publish the definition of the item. So we'd have to talk to Medicare about getting some sort of display. And I think say for example, I just know laboratory medicine, so each lab would create their own display to something like that. So it's kind of probably needs some sort of standard around that. And then similarly for DVA, you can look at this page yourself. We'd need an OID for them as well. So where that OID comes from, whether Services Australia have their own OID register, or it would come out of HL7's OID register. That would also need to be discussed. Similarly, the URLs, we'd have to discuss what those would be. I've put suggested URLs, so linked to the DVA website and the Medicare website. So if we just back up here, MBS Online, you want to make sure it had code system in there so you knew it was a code system or a value set, that type of thing. So there's a kind of fact-finding mission, some requirements in there for discussion, and we'd have to dig into the details. And obviously there's a lot of work involved in talking to Services Australia about how we would published and what the definition of the metadata would be and all that sort of stuff. Danielle's got a hand up.
I have. Could you scroll back up to, I think there was a row for proposed URL for canonical URL for discussion. Can I just ask about, I think, because there's a reason, and I think when we did the PBS items that we didn't actually use the website in there, kind of to be careful. And I've got a question there about how we've got MBS online. And I guess while I get that the website currently is like that, I'm going, do we really need to link it, and what are the advantages of doing it that way versus having a canonical URL that's more like how we've got it for the PBS ones, which kind of lives beyond their different kind of websites over time? Because that, I think, worries me, because eventually it's not going to actually be the website URL. That's my thought.
Yeah. Two things on that. I suppose I'm leaning a bit on RCPA and Ransker, where ideally we'd like them to host those value sets. And ideally we'd like MBS to host it, and that's their URL. And so mbs.gov.au, I don't know if it exists. I haven't looked that up, or who owns it. So I was just a bit concerned if we put a URL there that wasn't owned by the government, what effect
Well, no,
that
I
would
guess
have.
we'd have to get them to, like, whatever it is, they would have to agree to it. Like if it has gov in the domain name, they'd absolutely have to form that
Sure.
agreement. Either way, I suppose I'm concerned that the word online might not be the forever kind of thing, whereas I think the words MBS and gov and AU will be, sure, but the online bit, I think, is a point in time in which that's the parlance we use, and then we move off that eventually. So that worries me.
Sure. And that's why this is just a discussion document. So get down to the nitty gritty, talk to Services Australia about what we can use for that, and go from there, I think.
I think part of the point is that perhaps we should push them to have a enduring URL or an enduring URI, while they'll very likely go, oh, look, let's have this one because it's what we use now. Maybe I think part of the point is that we should have a position to advocate for a more enduring URI, even if it's not something they jump at first on first offer.
Cool. Marika. On mute.
Sorry. My question was around, you've recommended that we have two separate code systems for DVA and MBS/PBS with MBS and DVA. PBS is out of it, but having a combined value set. I'm slightly concerned that whether or not implementers will actually distinguish in their systems whether a code is DVA or a code is MBS, because that would change the system that they would need to be passing. And I'm not certain that they would be doing that as it stands, but I am just one person. I would welcome if anyone else could speak to that. I seem to remember something concern around distinguishing between things raised in previous discussions.
Yeah, I guess my concern is that Medicare, like DVA, use Medicare's billing service, and that they do lean heavily on Medicare, and Medicare controls the codes. So I don't see why we would have DVA with the Medicare items in a code system by itself when they're leaning on the Medicare items. And the only thing that is different is the price. But I mean, once again, this is just a discussion document. Brett?
I was going to jump back to URL stuff. So who is ultimately responsible for having that discussion? about URLs because it's Service Australia space, right? But does this fall into the agencies, government entities discussion? Because like I mean, NS electronic health might be another option, as a existing namespace.
Can we just qualify
Yeah.
there? Because do we have Christy on the line? Okay, so we don't have Christy on the line, who is sometimes here and is from Department of Health. So, oh no, we do. Christy, you're here. Cool. Yep. Sorry, I missed your name somehow when I think maybe I thought it was alphabetical and it's not.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I just didn't know which speakers my computer had defaulted to after moving from the office. I am here. Keep going and I'll just listen quietly and jump in when I need to.
Yeah, because I was kind of wondering about that, and I guess I want to ask that from the agency people on the line, because in the past the agency has been the point of contact and has absolutely managed that. I think we've still got those people who do that, like we've got Richard and we've got David and Stephen on the line who've managed how we got pbs.gov.au agreements with Services Australia for the URL and the OID registration. So I think the question might be to them of, is that still something that you guys are happy to pick up and is in your wheelhouse, or should we look to, if that's something that you're not sure about, you could come back to us, or then maybe we need to have the convo, I guess, with Christy about whether Christy could engage with Services Australia if that's not, if that's where we need to go. So, yep.
Yes, we've done that stuff before. Should we do that stuff going forward? Maybe. I'll find out about that, how much ownership of that we are willing to and able to take going forward. Look, it makes perfectly good sense for it to be the agency. So I'll go and find out whether I can get people to be willing to do that or to approve doing that work.
Could you give an update on that at our next call? So in the next fortnight?
Yes.
All right. Can we note then for the minutes an action item so that we can, track that one through and then add that to the agenda?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Because I think I think it's apparent to get a fully formed code system and value set is a bit of an exercise. But we could, if we had a URL allocated and agreement on that, we could just at least do a metadata kind of entry and have that available for vendors to use and we need a definition as to the code.
Yeah, and if it's metadata only, it could be just mbs.gov.au because we're not expecting them to host the metadata records, so that's fine.
Yeah, so but I think that would be good if we could follow through and get agreement and then at least have the URL allocated. We could kind of move ahead and try and create the metadata to support that, and then that would be a useful thing to have.
We'll let Richard do his thing then, but definitely from a department perspective, if there is any intervention that's needed on our side, just sing out and we will see what we can do to progress it.
Okay. Yeah, I just did a bit of a check. mbs.gov.au is an unknown URL, so there'll need to be, somebody will have to actually claim it on behalf of some government agency and so on. So all that stuff will have to be done eventually if it's going to be used.
Well, that's me. Any other questions or should we move on?
No, sounds like that's it. Thank you. Okay. So I will share. Okay, so our next agenda item is eRequesting display sequence extension discussion. Andy, are you
Yes, I
have
am.
to take that one? Do you want to share your screen or just?
No, I'll just
talk?
rave on.
Okay.
I raised this with Brett last week, maybe, which is an issue that is a question that popped up in the eRequesting group, where we ran across a need to represent a sequence of service requests. And the reason for doing this is that where a sequence of service requests constitute an order, the sequence as represented in FHIR is not explicit. So in FHIR, the way we represent service requests, obviously diagnostic request is a service request. They are linked from a fulfillment task, and the fulfillment tasks are grouped together with a link to a parent group task. One of the challenges in FHIR is where you have a link from a child to a parent. There is no inherent order in the siblings, and we do need that order in service requests. And the reason being that we have at this stage been instructed to coexist paper and digital diagnostic requesting, which means that when a order is printed at a clinical practice site, then the order of those tests is usefully reflected in the display of that same order at a collection center screen. And at the moment, we didn't have a way of representing that sequence. We fixed the problem by adding in an extension to service request, which was kind of a relative ordering integer. And that then gave us an ability when a fulfillment entity was looking at a series of service requests, they could determine the relative order as was presented in the paper form. The reason why this is useful is that we have examples in production of clinicians ordering up to 40 tests at a time. And in the collection center, they try to reconcile test by test in sequence. If the digital on-screen order is different from the paper order, it's a pain. It's a very painful exercise. And you can imagine there's a number there. 3 may be okay, but 4 isn't. Or maybe it's 4 and 5 or 4 and 6 or whatever it is. So while we were looking at that for service requests, there was a more general question came up as saying, isn't this a more general need, and should this not be resolved through AU base in the service request profile? And then there's also been some discussion in Zulip around this, and there has been suggestions that this issue could be resolved using things like request groups or request orchestration, which we've kind of been down before. I think Richard's contributed to that discussion. There are various reasons why that is both a bit of a sledgehammer to crack the egg, as well as it has unintended consequences, as Lloyd pointed out, in terms of an ability to recognize the individual service requests and how they're fulfilled. So I guess the question I wanted to raise with the FHIR Working Group is to say, do you peoples think that we should be looking at this as something which is more general for AU base to look at, or is this something you're happy for eRequesting to begin some experimentation with, and that at some later stage maybe we look at that, pulling it back to something more basic like AU base? I would say that we don't exactly have any explicit use cases necessarily outside of eRequesting, although you know, you could say, well, isn't this an issue with medication request with multiple medications? Yes, it could be, but one of the things obviously with e-prescribing is that we have separated the paper flow from the digital flow. So the reconciliation, which is the very specific need that we have for diagnostic requesting, is not really there. And yes, I do think that in diagnostic requesting, we will at some point need to separate the two streams, because it is really hard to maintain consistency and clinical correctness when you overlay paper and the digital worlds. But it's just, at the moment, this is an immediate problem we have.
Andy, sorry, I don't have the way to raise my hand. I noticed that Brett has raised the hand first, so I will speak after Brett. Thank you.
No, go ahead, Steve. Go.
All right, okay. Andy, I and OO and also medication or HSFA International Pharmacy Group have talked quite a fair bit about issues similar to this. And I think we acknowledge the use case that is needed in the diagnostic space. As you said, some providers can request up to 40 test requests. But in other use cases, in particular, I did extensive analysis on pharmacy ordering or medication ordering, in particular using use cases like, say, for example, chemotherapies, where the sequencings of the medications administrations are clinically important. And we decided that the request orchestration is probably more appropriate to service that kind of clinical use cases or requirements, acknowledging that it is too much of a heavyweight solutions for the use cases that you are talking about. So in response to your questions about whether or not this should be a more broad sort of requirements for AU-based, I think that based on the analysis that has been done, I would suggest that let's sort of create something for diagnostic requests first until there are other use cases to broaden it up to broader requirements in other clinical use cases, which I find the request orchestration is more useful in those scenarios.
So just to note that we did go down the request group / request orchestration path, and I didn't have any issue with the heavy weightedness of that approach. The bigger problem is that it is restrictive in managing the individual fulfillments of the components. And so you basically have to ensure then that all of the elements within the orchestration are subsumed in effect by the group. And that's not really the case in the reality of how diagnostic requests are fulfilled, in that even though today we don't necessarily expose things like sendaways in how we deal with it, the reality is there's a significant set of fulfillments that end up being passed over to another party. And, from our discussions, the labs do want to have an ability to have partial fulfillment and to represent that partial fulfillment in the individual task fulfillment statuses for service requests, as well as an overarching group status fulfillment. So they want to keep both of them, because if you have individual only or group only, neither one of them is actually a good solution. But the main bit was, as Lloyd pointed out to me, you basically lose the individual as soon as you go to the group, and that was a problem.
Yeah, I understand that, Andy. I'm not suggesting that diagnostic requests go down the path of using request orchestration for the analysis that I've done on chemotherapeutic request and administration. The request orchestration is important in the sense that for chemotherapies, you have different cycles that needs to be sequenced, and within each cycles you have different drugs that needs to be sequenced. So, and hence the reason that that we look into the request orchestration, which I'm not suggesting that service requests, as a diagnostic request, follow that. I'm just pointing out the differences, and I'm in support of what you are trying to do.
Yep, good, Brett.
Yeah, I mean, noting too, this is not the order that things must be done. This is the order that they are just to be displayed. Yeah. So it's so whilst you could use orchestration, is display orchestrating. The only thing, like, and obviously like eRequesting has an answer that they are kind of happy with in their own extension that could do the job. So I guess for us, it's like the question is there any desire to generalize this at this point without any other use cases noted that it needed, and or I think that's probably the main question for us. And yeah, and just noting too, like the mechanism. So Andy, does that mean if you decide, basically that group needs to be dealt with as a group always? So if something gets taken out of that group, you need to resequence the display, or at least consider that. Because that, like, yeah, I'm just thinking, like, if say automatic, like additional tests are added and things like that, that would need to be dealt with somehow.
Yeah, there's no
yeah.
So the sequence is not necessarily an incremental kind of monotonically increasing sequence, separated by 1. You could do the sequences being 10, 20, 30, 40, so that you could inject a 15 in there at some point. That wasn't our original kind of need. The bit that really, I guess, separates this is the sequencing of the service requests as a definition of the order versus the fulfillment sequence, the representation to the fulfiller of such a sequence. The grouping at the moment in eRequesting is a grouping at fulfillment. It's not a grouping at the test side. Now we do have a question mark around, is there an opportunity to have a service request group? But that's a whole other question, and we're still kind of exploring that. But we end up in a bit of a catch-22 in some of this, because of the way relationships are represented between children and their parent group. These reverse relationships where the child links to the parent create innately a lack of sequencing in that relationship, and you can't simply overlay it with an additional like list, because then you end up with this kind of circular kind of referencing, and that
makes sense.
Gets very painful.
Yep, that makes sense. And the only other thought bubble I had was, is this extension, would this extension be better on the reference instead of from the service request? Because effectively it's a sequence based on the parent reference, and it's not intrinsically part of the service request unless you like. And whilst I'm probably solving a case that doesn't exist, where you have multiple service requests in different groups, like I have a service request that's in more than one group, which is not really a thing.
No, and at the moment,
just making it more complicated. Yeah,
there's no concept of a service request group. The grouping is kind of inferred from the grouping associated with the task, and so you would be putting the sequencing in the task reference to the service request, but innately, our kind of basic premise is that if something is innately only to do with fulfillment, then it belongs on the fulfillment side of things. But if it's actually shared and it's always the same for the order, then it belongs on the service request side of things. Richard.
No, that's right.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Richard.
I've got a couple of questions. One is, this idea of ordering things is probably relevant to a range of bits and pieces. So the extension could be a fairly general extension eventually. The other one is, can you explain why list is a bad choice here? I've got a collection of things. They don't have a lot in common, except that I want them in a particular order. I would have thought list was a fairly lightweight way of saying these things have this sequence, and the list resource describes the nature of why I've sequenced them.
Yes, well, that list was certainly as kind of the, I guess, more general options available in terms of how do you represent a collection. There are many. Obviously, one of them is that whole request group, request orchestration. There was list. There's also service request itself, which can be the basis of a collection of other service requests. The reason we didn't go down the list path there's a few things with that. One is we would, in effect, be providing a sibling to a task group. So the focus of a task group would actually be a list for the service requests. But we know that there is ongoing debate about how much clinical information potentially should be shared across service requests, and therefore to allow that to be captured, we would end up needing to add quite complex extensions into a list to both carry the sequencing information as well as shared service request content. So that's problematic.
Right. Yeah. I guess my thought would be that to use the list purely for the sequencing, but not to reproduce the content, so that if you've got a collection of service requests and you want to know how to order them, you've got to find the list, and then that gives you the order. So that's sort of a fairly clunky way of doing it. But that if you wanted to, but the list would give you nothing but the ordering. So in that sense, it'd be a lightweight list, but it's still a fairly clunky piece of machinery for giving you an ordering. Probably its biggest advantage is that it's not, if you wanted to have several different orderings, you could just have several different lists. But in this particular case, there's only one ordering that's of interest. So having a general thing like these lists seems to offer complexity with not a lot of benefit. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the challenges is if we had a couple of other examples of where this could be used, we would be in a much better situation to make an informed decision. But at the moment, set of requirements we have are quite limited to this particular need in eRequesting. It may turn out to be a temporary need, or it may turn out to be a long-term need, but it's at the moment a fairly lightweight way of kind of fixing the problem. And even our experience is things like this, even if you at some point want to take them out of use, they're actually quite easy to remove from production, because this will always, it's only an optional thing. It's not a mandatory attribute. So if there is a sequence extension, then you can use that to get the display sequence represented. If there isn't any, then you're free to do what you want in terms of displaying it. So it's actually quite lightweight when it comes to future use and what may come later on.
And Andy, if you had a list anyway, you need to have something to order it by, right? Still. So you still need an extension to.
No, I think in a list you can say the items in the list are ordered or the items in the list are not ordered. I think that's the basic thing. Here we go. Yeah, hang on.
You can say what the ordering means. So you could declare, if you wish to, that the list is ordered based on sequence or rendering or a whole number of things if you wanted to. Yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure a list can have an arbitrary ordering. Look at the ordering in the file I gave you. I think you can do that with list entry.
There is, so if there's a native element that you fill out if your list is ordered by, and you type what ordering is it? Like, is it alphabetical? Is it by patient? Is it for this purpose? Is it something else? So that it would be how it works.
But technically, can you guarantee order in an implementation?
Oh, I think I presume that I don't work a lot with JSON, but I presume in JSON that list.entry is in fact a JSON list, and so the order is guaranteed.
It certainly gives you an explicit order, and yes, it would suffice for what we needed. However, by doing so, we would in effect need to move on putting a list in as the counter to a task group, and then kind of formulate a whole bunch of very concrete decisions about the representation of shared clinical content across service requests, which we don't have the foundation for as yet. So I guess the question here was not necessarily about how to do this in eRequesting, but more is that is there a sufficiently generic, are there other use cases that anyone knows about that would convince this group that no, we should actually do this within the AU base, for instance, service request profile to allow that as a more generic thing?
Yeah, I would like to move that we let the eRequesting group continue their investigation and maintain their own extension until there's more information and more cases that would require a generalization.
I'll second that.
Do we have to move though? Does it have to be a motion?
Well, I just like to make it clear.
All right.
Or do you want to just end the conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, because I don't think there's a great compelling reason to take this up because we don't have any other.
Agreed, and that can just be clearly in the minutes that it's discussed, and we've not identified any
I suggest we minute that and move on.
Yep. Excellent. I'm happy.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Although, Michael, you have a...
Yep.
So, oh, I was already unmuted. So before we move to next meeting plans, I have an item that I'd just like to discuss, and hopefully it'll be a quick one. It's around an addition I want to make to AU based around the general guidance for adding SNOMED CT. Do we have 5 minutes to look at that? Or do you want me to move that to the next meeting?
Let's move that to the next meeting, I think.
Okay. All right, no worries. We'll get it formally put on the agenda for next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so next meeting plans then. We have...
And I think it's also like around this and also about MBS PBS. I think I would like to ask this group if there's any particular items we wanted a breakout session run at the Connectathon on. And I guess that's an open-ended question.
If we could get some representatives from Services Australia there from there
to the Connectathon.
To the Connectathon, I think that'd be good.
I mean, the tickets are already sold out, so I would say no. Not this one. I mean, that could be something that we could do for the August Connectathon, but because I think we're past that opportunity.
Unless somebody with appropriate knowledge from Services Australia has already signed up for the Connectathon.
I mean, and whilst this is a specific thing, I think we need to. Services Australia has a lot of material that we care about, and it would be good to have a way to deal with that more generally, like have at least somebody nominated on their side to handle this discussion, or the agency will handle it, as part of their remit. Yeah, so it's just more how are we going to do business as well as getting an answer to this thing in particular.
I think I possibly did maybe the wrong thing in picking that specific instance. I guess I was just, in terms of like, not just next meeting, but noting there is a Connectathon coming up and there's an opportunity there to be having conversations with implementers. And at the moment we're doing a lot of polls and we're kind of trying to reach out to a FHIR implementing community. And I think that this is another opportunity to run a session at the Connectathon for any of those things, because AU Base doesn't have a track, right? But there's still a whole bunch of things that I think we should start putting in our kind of like list of tools of taking some concepts to talk about at Connectathons so that we do actually reach that FHIR implementer audience and can sense check things out. So I just wanted to raise that now. To go, is there anything we're currently thinking about and working through, or anything we might be shortly that would be a really good opportunity? Which sounds like currently no, but maybe we could confirm at the next FHIR Work Group. Let's put that on the agenda for next meeting, maybe. Just confirm if there's anything that we do want to try to organise.
I have another topic that I would like to do a breakout session on. I think Marika's also raised this, which is the whole topic of pre-authorization. I think it's a valuable thing for us to start looking at. It's an emerging need in diagnostic requesting, and obviously from medications and prescriptions, we have that in play already. So just to have some discussion around possible alternatives to use, and maybe reflecting on what has happened in the US around some of that.
That would be really useful. Thanks for raising, Andy.
No worries.
Yeah,
Checks in the mail.
Good. That's good. I would like us to get around to provenance at some point as well, like in general. Because it's an unwieldy beast in the FHIR spec, so it needs more guidance for local things.
And the systems with it are horrible.
Yeah, exactly. So we just need kind of like a set of things we can do with it. It would be interesting, I think.
Yeah, it'd be great to get some use cases discussed and kind of just some guidance around, you need to do it. Here are 3 things we thought about which kind of work, and it doesn't need to be absolute standard.
I think that's a good idea. Could we take some action items then to develop some breakout proposals? One on pre-auth, one on provenance as potential breakouts. And would the right thing be to do to like come back and like look at those breakouts in our next meeting, or just we could, I suppose we've got 10 minutes left to go, hey, that sounds great. If you're happy to do them, let's do them. I don't know.
I'd like to look at provenance. I can do that one.
I guess I'm trying to work out a more point of order. If we've got 2 kind of thoughts so far, but maybe there's more, do we come back next FHIR Work Group meeting, go, hey, here are the kind of breakouts we want to run and why, and talk through those? Or
I think that's
yeah,
I think that's a good idea. And then like, yeah, people would, I guess, nominate themselves to kind of lead out in as part of that discussion. That would be good, because someone has to prep it to at least have a set of things to talk about.
Okay.
But I think an agenda item for next time would be good.
Yep. Okay, anybody else have anything?
In terms of next agenda, Michael's also popped the JIRA on the chat, which I think was that one. So that's there that we can copy over.
Are you adding that or grabbing that to pop in the minutes?
Yeah. I'm putting that as a thing. I'm putting these as actions for.
All right, thanks.
For the coaches, yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Would it be if Brett's typing into the minutes, Jane, could you edit it so we can see Brett's work as he's typing?
I don't know, that will show it, will it? If he's
if you go edit, you should be able to see.
Okay.
Down the bottom.
Oh, didn't know you could do that. Very cool.
So I'm just gonna I'm cleaning this up, but I've got the putbacks. Yeah, I guess if people are going to do, like, if people have an interest in a breakout, I don't know how we're going to, because it'd be good to know by next time who's interested in, like say the pre-authorization topic. If we go, hey, 2 or 3 people want to have some information, at least to have that breakout. So we probably want to name names next time as to who will be in that breakout and be able to administer
Can we have virtual attendance at some of the breakouts?
If you're going to organise one and organise virtual attendance and all that sort of content, that sounds amazing, Richard.
Ah, it does, doesn't it? Mm. I'll be very quiet now.
Oh, and I think we have confirmed our working group meeting. So I think we're in Q1 on the first day. And that will be a hybrid of the, yeah. So we're running parallel with the symposium. So you can choose to be in the work group or you can choose to be in the symposium.
That's probably going to draw away quite a fair bit of people from the work group meeting, Brett.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So I mean, there will be work groups.
Yeah, but that's
there will
always
be
the
groups
case.
meeting all day. Yeah, exactly.
It was the case last year, but we still had. Actually, I think we might have even had an all-time high record number of people attending the FHIR Work Group in Q1 in the last symposium.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I'm not so worried about Sydney meeting because I think it's so well subscribed, so there should be sufficient people to spread around.
And some of it is virtual.
Yeah. Steph, I can see.
Brett, is there going to be an infrastructure and tooling breakout?
That's the fair. Yeah, I think that's a good. Yeah, I think that might be good. I was trying to remember what I was wanting for a breakout, and that was one of the things. so it's I think because we do have our calls, but we're running on the Fridays, and like that's more about services and infrastructure questions, and I think I'd be very happy. I think to do that.
Yep, thanks. Yeah, the last couple of meetings generated some interest in a breakout. So
yeah, because I think there's a piece like that is on the backlog, an authoritative terminology server for HL7 Australia, and some questions around that. So it's I'd be keen to talk about something in that session maybe. But yeah, I think I have to work out what, because this is like not necessarily sparked stuff, but more general as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I can say that I won't be bringing any PSSs to our next call. I'm going to save them all up for the face-to-face, I reckon, for the hybrid. Mostly because I think we're working a lot on getting the face-to-face for core and patient summary. And I think it's after that one that I'll have finally got around to drafting and getting like the co-chairs okay across the scope statements, and then I'll bring that back. So I reckon that's the 18th of March meeting we'll end up having.
Oh yeah, so I didn't finish my thought on the actual work group session. So Q1 will be FHIR Work Group, Q2 will be AU Core, I think that's right, and Q3 will be patient summary project, and Q4 will be eRequesting. So yeah, hopefully that works out for everyone. And I think the symposium
so in relation
is
to that,
fully
I
subscribed. Yeah.
There'll be more, like we'll talk about it in next meeting, the administrative details for like there'll be an invite come out and it'll have a Teams invite rather than Zoom, and you know, all the usual stuff as we get closer to the day where the HL7AU and the facilities will you know, finish off those admin details and where we're going and when you turn up and how you, if you're not going to be there in person, how you connect and all that sort of stuff. But I reckon that's maybe next meeting But definitely some comms will be sent out to let people know.
Yeah, because there are differences. So yeah, we'll have to make sure everyone's on board.
Okay, if that's all, I think we're at time.
Yeah, cool. Great. I'm going to review the call and actually write some of the minutes. So hopefully they'll be available. I'll send them through to you, Jane. You can send them out.
All right. Thanks, everyone. It was a good meeting.
Thanks.
Catch you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.